Welcome back to the Scrape the Planet Web Scrapers course taught by me, professor, instructor, teacher, dude talking to a camera for way too long, Mitchell Edwards. If you missed the first couple of sections, I highly recommend going back and looking at those. We are going to be cribbing a bit of code from those sections. We're also going to be taking a lot of the concepts that we learned. Obviously, this is a course that builds on top of itself, and this section is going to get a bit more complex. We're going to be talking about spiders in this section and advanced or more intermediate design concepts in this section and in section 5. Make sure you understand the concepts of scraping, make sure you understand the ethics of scraping, and a lot of the different stuff that we talked about before. We're pretty quickly going to move back into that. So spiders. That's going to be what this section is all about. It's all about building spiders. We're going to talk about what is a spider, how's it different from a scraper, why would we want to build a spider, different things like that. We're going to start basic, foundational. As you can tell, I've got the glove on, so we're going to be doing a little bit of whiteboarding in this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about the problem that we're going to approach for our first spider. The video after that, we're going to build out some skeleton code related to that problem. Then we're going to fill it in, improve our design, talk about some design concepts, probably get back to the whiteboard. And we're going to talk about a different kind of spider to solve a different kind of problem. So, like I said, all of this stuff is going to build on the stuff that we talked about in the last couple of sections. So make sure that you understand that. So let's start very simple. What is a spider? What is a spider? So, spiders. So for scrapers, I kind of define the difference this way. So for a scraper, we know what we want. For a spider, we might not. So for the scraper, we had a very specific target. Target equals specific. We kind of knew exactly the process through which we were going to scrape the data. We knew the scope. We had a generally fairly narrow scope. So that's something that defines scrapers pretty well. Generally narrow scope. So that's something in general is more specific to scrapers than to spiders. We also had a general way of iterating over our data. So data iteration. So the example is the stock data that we scraped in the last section in the first section of, or the last video in the first video of the last section. We knew exactly which pages we wanted to scrape because we knew exactly what scope we had. We knew which stock tickers we wanted to grab. And it was fairly easy to create the page URL based on that. So we had a very specific target. It was very easy to figure out those URLs. We had a generally pretty narrow scope. We had those specific tickers that we were looking at. And the data iteration was basically wait a couple of seconds, scrape these pages with a second or two in between, wait a couple of seconds, repeat. So the data iteration was fairly easy. With a spider, we may not know the target, or the target may be very general. Target is large. Let's just say that. Wide scope. And the way that you iterate over the data is different. Let's just put it this way: generally with spiders, the iteration over the data is not as important. You're not going to go and do the same repetitive processes to the same data every single time. You're instead going to be discovering new data, and we'll talk about here in a second that that's essentially what spiders are all about. It's about data discovery. It's about scraping new data that you may not have known that existed before. So it's all about that programmatic exploration of data. So data exploration instead of iteration. So for a scraper, the scrapers that we built before, we knew exactly which web pages we were worried about. It was fairly simple to figure out the URLs. With a spider, it's different. So a spider starts usually at what we'll call a root node. So we'll call this root. And that root node, generally, the way that you decide on what a root node for a spider is going to be is it's going to be a page that is as rich as possible with child nodes. And what a child node is you start at this root node, which is usually a web page, and you want to look for a web page that has tons and tons of links to other web pages that you might be interested in. So we're going to take the example of a forum. And on this forum, we're going to say our root node is basically our home page. So think of like Reddit. Reddit is actually a fairly good example for this because on the home page, depending on how you're signed in or if you're not signed in, you're going to have tons and tons of links to new pages on different subforums with user profiles, with comments, with links to other pages. It's a very, very link-rich page, and you can also iterate over it pretty easily. So Reddit is a fairly good forum to use as an example. So let's say we're looking at Reddit's homepage, and we've got post 1, post 2, post 3, post 4, and post 5. So all of these are in this root page. And each one of these posts, as soon as you visit the post, it's going to have comments. And this one's going to have comments. And this one's going to have comments. And this one's going to have comments. And you get the picture. But each of these comments is also going to have users. So let's just say user 1. So these two comments are both written by the same user. Let's say user 2, that one, that one. And you kind of start to build out this web. You can kind of start to see why it's called a spider as well. It's got all of these legs flying off of it. So you've got all of these comments, and they've all got users. And those users are all connected, and you've got this big web of relationships. And the important part of building spiders is realizing that it's all about content discovery. Instead of knowing exactly what you want, instead of having that list of stock tickers or that list of users that you're interested in, you've got basically a site that you are pointing the spider at, and you're saying, go at it. Now you can scope those spiders in. For example, on Reddit, I might be just interested in one particular user. I might be just interested in one particular subreddit. But a spider, instead of just scraping that subreddit programmatically, it's going to discover new posts, new comments, new users that are involved in that community. So this is very, very important to understand that spiders have a very specific application. We wouldn't have wanted a spider for our stock price example if I gave our scraper a list of particular tickers. Let's just say the list that we had before, which was, here, I'll do some erasing real quick. So let's say we had our list from before. It was, let's say, I'll erase all of it just to make it a little bit prettier. So we had our list from before, which was Microsoft, T-Mobile, Google I think was in there, and so on. So we have this list, and what we expect, so that's our list. What we expect is Microsoft, T-Mobile, or AT&T, yeah, AT&T, I had that wrong last time, Google, etc. We're expecting their prices and deltas. And if instead of getting their prices and deltas, we actually got, let's say, Verizon's price and delta. It's supposed to be a triangle. I'm failing on that. And we got, maybe we did get Microsoft's price and delta. And all of this happens because instead of grabbing those specific stock tickers, we just started crawling and grabbing, as many stock tickers as humanly possible. So instead of getting 3 specific ones, like we were expecting, we got 50 random ones. So that's not ideal behavior. We are obviously trying to build something that is very, very specific to these stock tickers. And that's why we built a scraper for it instead of a spider. A spider is more for discovering new things. It's about content discovery and not just content scraping. It still does scraping, and that's why spiders are a subspecies of scrapers, so to speak. Whereas scrapers they have this very specific scope. Spiders are much better geared towards rich text pages that have tons of links, either external or internal, depending on what you're interested in. And by that I mean like Reddit, for example, internal Reddit links are only going to lead to more Reddit pages, whereas external Reddit links will link to news sites and other forums and things like that. So spiders are very, very well geared towards content discovery. They're not geared towards things like our stock price scraper. We're going to be building our scraper on IMDb, and here's why. If we look at an IMDb page, it's got tons and tons of links to internal pages. So one page might link to 50 other internal IMDb pages, and that's actually perfect for a spider because the more links you have on one page, the easier it is to do that content discovery, because each page is going to lead you down tons and tons of different strands of this web. If instead each page only had 1 or 2 links, then for each page you're only going to get 1 or 2 new strings. Instead, you're really creating a lot more breadth, and you're really able to gather way more data based on one page if it's got tons of links on it, rather than a more simple page that doesn't have as many. So we talked earlier about scope. I think we talked about it right here. We said that spiders have a wide scope, and they do. They have a much wider scope than, say, the simple stock price ticker that we built in the last section. They still are scoped, though. Maybe you've got one that only wants to look at internal pages that are also on the same website as the one that you're spidering. You don't want to leave that website. That's a fairly common way to limit the scope. Let's say you only want to go to a certain depth. So if I've got a depth of 3, I land at my root node, and that's at level 0. And then I've got page 1, page 2, page 3, that's at level 1. And then each one of these is also going to have subpages, and that's going to be at level 2. And each one of these subpages is going to have another subpage, and that's at level 3. So a very, very common way to kind of limit scope is to say, okay, I'm not going to crawl infinitely. I'm going to specifically stop at a certain depth. That's a very, very common and very, very easy way to limit a spider's scope. That's actually a feature of several different like web testing environments. Like Burp Suite has a specific configuration that allows you to limit the scope of spiders to a certain depth. Very, very useful, and actually we're going to be using it within this section as well. So, it's tons of whiteboarding. I've just got just this spaghetti all over the virtual whiteboard. We're going to get right to it in the next section to talk about our problem statement. Our problem statement, I'm not going to just spoil it because the next section I'm going to go into detail. We're going to talk about the problem statement in the next section, then after that, build out our skeleton code and finally get to actually filling that stuff in. I hope this made sense, but if it doesn't, it's going to make way, way, way more sense once we actually start building one out, and once we're actually going to build out 2 different spiders in this section. And once we start building that out, you're really going to see the differences between scrapers and spiders. If you didn't understand it, totally understand. I may not have explained it as clearly as I needed to, but it's going to become way more clear in the next couple of videos. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.